When talking about Halo Reach's level and map design, it did something quite different from the other Halo games in the Halo series. It had the idea to merge all the maps from Firefight and multiplayer into the campaign. Well, to tell the truth, that wasn't how it was done. It was made by planning out the campaign and having the multiplayer and Firefight developers choose parts from any level where they'd like to claim and then therefore design for. By having similar areas in different modes of play, it added more continuity between the campaign, Firefight and multiplayer game modes. But here's the thing, I would argue that by doing so, it overall damaged the way levels were designed, and caused maps to be balanced incorrectly and therefore decreased the overall quality of multiplayer, Firefight and campaign. So for today, let's discuss the positive and negatives about this philosophy in map design in Halo Reach. So let's start this off by talking about one of the most important things when it comes to creating a map: balancing it. Now the problem with trying to create maps where you're trying to create it for both campaign and then it's going to work for either multiplayer and Firefight, but I think this applies more to multiplayer due to obviously having a completely different scenario. Obviously when it comes to balancing a campaign level and then the Firefight level, it's going to be somewhat easier because both of them you have the player fighting AI like elites, grunts, jackals and all that, rather than fighting enemy players, aka humans. So the biggest problem with trying to balance it is you've got to try and decide how to balance it to get it to work right with both. And the thing is, I'm not going to say it's impossible, because trust me, it would be, but the amount of effort and time it would take to balance a map for two completely different purposes just isn't reasonable. And it shows that in the game, because a lot of the multiplayer maps in Reach feel awful. Definitely they don't feel the best that they could be, because they haven't been specifically balanced just for multiplayer. They've also had an attempt to balance it for single player as well. Because when you're developing a map and you've got two different teams trying to balance for two different things, you've been limited to a choice. Do you balance it really well for one thing and then have it work really poor for the other? Or do you just decide to have it mediocre for both? And I think that's what they ended up choosing, because a lot of the maps, granted, don't feel good in either single player or multiplayer, because obviously they weren't designed for it. And the thing is, you can tell a lot of multiplayer maps were chosen and put in very specific spots, because in some of the cases, multiplayer maps are put in specific spots where you don't even fight any enemies. Like on the Long Night of Solace, you've got that Saber launching bay, and there's a multiplayer map inside of that. And guess what? You don't even fight any enemies in that one. So it's very obvious to tell that that one was specifically put in that spot because they knew that you weren't going to fight any AI, and so it could balance it a hell of a lot better for Spartan on Spartan action. And then you've got the start of Exodus, where you start in the multiplayer map. Forget the name right now, but you'll get footage for it. And the thing is, in single play, you should run straight past that thing and don't even worry about fighting any Covenant in it. And I feel as if that's in design. I imagine there are a few other spots where that's the case, where you're either fighting very little or no enemies at all. And it doesn't surprise me, because I mean, it would be so painful to try and balance it for both multiplayer and campaign. Now to talk about the Firefight, I believe that the Firefight itself is going to cause less damage, but obviously I reckon it's still going to cause some damage. Because the problem with Firefight is you're going to have to try and design a map for both campaign and Firefight. And the problem with that is, in campaign, you're having to specifically go from one point to the other and then leave the Firefight area. I mean that for the campaign, balance wise, you're designing it to only play the map in a few ways or going from a few locations. And it means it's only going to be balanced if you're coming out or through one direction rather than both. It also means that for the Firefight team, they have to design the map in such a way where it can be used effectively in completely different game modes. You know, ones like Grunt Apocalypse and all these crazy Fiesta ones, or ones with rocket launchers and all that, and then you got more serious modes. And for Firefight, it's pretty hard to balance for, because you're going to do all that. And then you're going to try and get it to balance it for the campaign as well, which is more annoying. Because that's the thing, there are two cases where the Firefight maps in the campaign are used exactly what they're designed for. Like in the Pillar of Autumn, you quite literally use that as a firefight section. You come into the section and you use it for a firefight for a good part of it until you leave. Use the Mac cannon. That area was probably, they all decided to probably use it as a firefight area because it would fit with the story, and it means you really only need the firefight team to balance for that. Because imagine in that scenario you'd have less trouble balancing it because in both cases it's being developed to be used as a firefight area. Same goes with the Long Night of Solace. When you start to play that level, when you get inside the Covenant ship, you do go right past that area pretty much. But then at the end of the level, you use it as a firefight section as well. I mean, it doesn't really surprise me. That's also being smart about the way they balance maps, as it makes sense to use an area for what it was, or partly is designed to be used as. And it means it can be balanced easier because you both got the campaign and the firefight people balancing it to do very similar things. Granted, not all firefight section maps in the campaign are specifically used for firefight sections. A few of them are. And that's the thing, is there is evidence that from a developer's standpoint it is a very painful process, or a regrettable process, to try and get all the multiplayer and firefight game modes into the campaign as well. Because from the Halo Reach developer commentary, he can be quoted as something along the lines of he wouldn't know if he would do it again.
This exit out of this, the Pioneer barn out into the pasture. It's a great firefight map too. This was so cool. We integrated all the multiplayer and firefight spaces into the campaign. It was a big pain in the butt. I don't know if we'd do it again if we were to do this game over, but I think overall it served its purpose well here.
And so from upon that, we can just simply tell that even trying to make all the maps, into the campaign was painful. And trust me, it definitely wouldn't be an easy task. I mean, the evidence I've shown, or the reasoning at least that I've shown you beforehand, sort of comes to that conclusion that it would be a massive pain in the ass to try and balance for. So I reckon from a balance point, it really doesn't work. Now I'm going to get to more subjective points, because that was my main thing, because I think that's definitely the most important thing. Now here's some other things that had been fixed afterwards, due to map DLC, which obviously doesn't follow the rules of it being in the campaign, and that being the limit of locations that you can use for the maps. Because here's the thing, when designing a map, one of the things that you can do is choose the location or the aesthetic that you'd like to use. And the thing is, if you have to make your map make sense in the context of the campaign level, it does drastically limit where you can put your maps or where you have them located. Like for example, at least before any DLC came out, there were no snow maps no multiplayer snow maps. And granted, it's not limited to snow maps. There are definitely certain things that you can't do, but that's the problem is, while granted, yes, you do have a whole planet of locations to choose from, you can't choose all of them because you only have 10-11 missions to choose from, and the multiplayer map itself is going to make context within that space. And so it means the variety of locations is somewhat limited, which is a shame. And in most cases, the multiplayer map variant from the campaign is somewhat different. In some cases they added fog, changed the time of day from night to day, or vice versa. In a lot of the cases these are very minor ones. Obviously ones like changing time of day are a lot more massive, but I don't feel as if it's enough to completely change the aesthetic and give a completely different feeling. That was the thing. The thing I always liked about it was the map variety, especially in other Halo games, because imagine, if you take a look at Halo 1, a lot of its maps that it has are in very weird and bizarre locations. You've got a Covenant Hydro facility, that wasn't even in the campaign. I mean, granted, there are a few maps in Halo 1 that were lightly based off it, you had Death Island, which was definitely inspired from the Silent Cartographer, but definitely wasn't an exact copy. And I will give a few, points to this whole putting the multiplayer and firefight maps into the campaign. I will give you a few points. It definitely adds some continuity, so you're given context for this area. And in the firefight areas, it definitely helps a bit. It's always neat knowing a bit more about a multiplayer map, so you can look at a specific door or whatnot, and you know what's behind there and the more context of the actual area. And it means that the area itself isn't as foreign, so when you look out into the skybox or behind the doors, it's less as you have a more understanding of the environment that you're in. But I don't feel as if it's a big enough thing for me to really care about. Like, sure, it's neat to be able to wander outside the skyboxes and all that, but I don't feel as if it's a good sacrifice. And the sad part is that a lot of these rules, like having the maps located in the campaign, were sort of broken with the DLC. And granted, I do think it was a good thing, obviously, because it allowed the balancing to actually be fine-tuned and all that, and allowed the locations of maps to be completely unique. Like, you have a few more locations for maps in the Halo Reach DLC. I'm gonna ignore the anniversary ones, because they sort of don't count. The thing is, due to all the DLC, you had a lot more maps now, and pretty much all of them had to be specifically balanced for one thing, meaning a lot of the DLC maps perform a lot better in combat, is what I find. Granted, they're not flawless. I reckon overall, if I was to give an overall score for the DLC maps, excluding the anniversary ones, the average map would probably rate a lot higher for me than the ones that were seen in the campaign. I guess that's the thing, for having that cool little thing, it was only for like some of them, which can feel sort of out of place, so I do find that a bit weird. And it's also sad for Forge, because any map that's based off the campaign isn't really usable for Forge. Granted, you could do small modifications, but you can't really do a hell of a lot in a small map. So it feels sort of weird, like what kind of purpose do these maps serve, at least in Forge? They don't really serve much of a point, because you can't do a hell of a lot in them. Now, I may have just made that sound as if I hate the maps that are from the campaign, or the Firefighter multiplayer ones from the campaign. And granted, they aren't necessarily my favourite, but I don't absolutely hate. Obviously, some of them do have choke points, which I do not like. But I think it was fine what they did, because adding in continuity between campaign and multiplayer is a pretty neat thing. But to be honest, would I prefer them not doing it to have an increase in the locations of maps and how they're balanced? Yes. Obviously, if they could have the maps based from the campaign and have them balanced perfectly, like in a perfect scenario, I don't see any harm in that, at least having a few. Anyway, I would like to thank you for watching. It does mean a lot to me that you've decided to hear my bloody ramblings. You know, since you made it to the end, you must have enjoyed it, and so giving a like would be appreciated. If you're just hating everything I say, you can dislike it. Want to hear more stuff that I say, you know, all that kind of shit, you can subscribe. Do the bell if you want. If you want to see what kind of shit I do on Twitter, or want to chat to me on Discord, link will be in the description for that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Feedback for the comments, and I hope I get to see you again soon.